पृथिवी शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगं शान्तिर्द्यौ शान्तिर्दिशः शान्तिरवान्तर दिशा शान्तिरग्निः शान्तिर्वायुः शान्तिरादित्यः शान्तिश्चन्द्रमा शान्तिर्नक्षत्राणि शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिर्वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्गौ शान्तिरजा शान्तिरश्व शान्तिः पुरुषः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्ब्राह्मणः शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः शान्तिर्मे Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, Sarva Sarvatra Nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Asato ma satkamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityo avirmaheti, rudrayatte dakshinam mukham, tenamam pahi nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we shall continue with Sutra number 19, which we began studying last week. Let us read it together once again. That's on page 74. Naradastu tadarpita akhila acharata tad vismarane parama vyakulata iti cha. But Narada feels that devotion is surrender of all activities to God and extreme anguish if he is forgotten. We saw in the earlier 3 or 4 sutras, Narada briefly described what other teachers of bhakti have said about the characteristics, the primary characteristic of that divine love, that devotion. In this sutra, Narada gives his own view. He begins with but. The beginning with but shows that Narada is showing that what he is offering is a little bit different. It's not exactly identical with whatever the other acharyas have said up to this point. He feels that devotion is surrender of all activities. Now here, all is very important. Narada does not limit the practice of devotion to certain activities, which are obviously activities associated with devotion. For instance now, when we meditate, when we do japa, when we sing, do some singing of devotional hymns, of devotional songs, when we do spiritual study, especially study related to the glories of God. Now all these activities are clearly associated with devotion. We can recognize it. But here he is not saying only those activities, here he is saying all activities. Now, in our life, in the lives of pretty much most of us, especially those of us who have taken seriously to spiritual life, we tend to make these division. There is this spiritual part of my life, spiritual activities, going to a temple or a church or a mosque, doing meditation, study. So any activities associated with a place of worship, that's the spiritual part of me. And everything else, we generally say, well, that's the secular part. That I'm going to a school or whether I work somewhere, the responsibilities I have with my family, with my workplace, to my country, all this is secular part of me. And then this is the religious or spiritual part. What Narada is pointing out here is the devotion is the surrender of all activities, not just the spiritual activities. In other words, this wall that separates the spiritual from the secular has to be at least permeable in the beginning, at least something that we can easily cross, that we should not have a very rigid wall separating the spiritual and the secular. oftentimes that wall is primarily in our mind, because in practice, a person with innate spiritual tendencies and a sincere desire to lead spiritual life will find that we cannot limit our spiritual activities only to a certain time of the day. We will find that in spite of ourselves, even when we are busy doing things which are ostensibly secular, a part of me will still be thinking about God. A part of me will still be in some ways reminded of some of the ideas related to spiritual life. And as our spiritual life deepens, we will find that the intensified awareness that is generated with the good practice of meditation doesn't stop when the meditation ends. It gets carried over. So even after, let's say, after you finish your meditation, you have to straight away go to school or go for work. We just don't switch on and off that way. So if you have had a good meditation, that feeling of calmness, that feeling of surrender will linger at least for a while, even when you are going to school. It may dissipate after a while, depending on the strength of one's meditative awareness. But gradually, with practice, we will see that while our awareness might be most strong and intense while we are meditating, when we get up from the meditation seat and become busy with other things in life, a little of that will get carried over. And if we can kind of maintain it until it's the time for our evening meditation, then we will see that the evening to settle our mind and focus our mind in that evening meditation will be easier if there is some kind of a link between my morning meditation and my evening meditation. Sometimes the example given is this. For instance, there is a wheel, and we know if you can kind of rotate that wheel, move that wheel a little bit, and then the wheel will keep on moving. And then, even when you stop doing that, because of the momentum, the wheel will still keep on going for a while. And then, of course, due to air resistance and friction, it will stop. And we know from a simple, the basic science, that the limiting friction is always more. In other words, that the force necessary to move a wheel which is stationary is always more than the force necessary to keep the wheel moving. So when we meditate, and if we have had a good meditation someday, the wheel of the mind, so to speak, which is rotating around God or around our spiritual ideal, will be moving well during meditation. Then the meditation stops, I get to now go and do other things. That wheel will still keep on moving for a little while. And that's why oftentimes we will see immediately after meditation, for a few minutes or a few hours if you are lucky, that feeling of calmness will kind of continue. But by the time it's time for our evening meditation, that wheel has come to a complete stop. And therefore, again, we have to struggle. And evening meditation sometimes can be tougher for many people because we have already, all the things that have happened in the course of the day are still fresh in the mind. So to kind of, again, switch those off is not always easy. Sometimes morning meditation is a little bit easier if you have had a good sleep. then the mind is relatively calm, it's not disturbed by anything else, and then it becomes easy. There is no hard and fast rule about this. This kind of a general observation. Now, after our morning meditation, when the wheel is still kind of moving steadily, and the meditation is over, and we have got to now attend to other things in life, if I can find a way to now and then just give a little bit of push to that wheel, I will succeed in keeping it moving for a longer time. And that's why we need to find creative ways to keep that wheel moving. For instance, you can set at the stroke of every hour, say it's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. In olden days, we used to have these clocks with pendulums, and every hour sometime you'll get this strike. And that's kind of getting outdated now. But you have got timers on your phone or on your wristwatch. If you can find some way, say periodically, once every hour, something to remind me, and then all I need to do, I don't have to stop doing whatever work I'm doing, I can still do it, just mentally remember your mantra once or twice. Just mentally bow down to your Ishta, your chosen ideal. Even that small bit of remembrance is a way of kind of just giving a little bit of a nudge to that wheel to make sure it doesn't stop. Again, oftentimes, just as sometimes at our workplace on our desk, we put, oftentimes people put pictures of their family or their children or their grandchildren. Again, because it just reminds us, we don't feel that then, even if you go to a workplace, you're not separated from your family because your family, at least you're reminded of the family through those pictures. Now, spiritual seeker similarly can have some symbol or some picture. If you don't want to make it too visible, if there are other people around and you don't want to do that, well, just maybe put it in your wallet or put it in your pocket. Anything, again, find a way to somehow the mind should be periodically reminding us about my spiritual part of my life. And the more often I find a way to remind myself of it, I'm kind of keeping that wheel moving. Then the evening, when your work is done, major work of the day is done, and you sit for meditation again, you'll find that wheel is already moving a little bit. And then the meditation will become a little bit easier. So that is what surrendering all activities means, making no distinction. Ultimately, if we recognize, there is this one story that I'm reminded of, which is many of you probably know it already. And it deals with Narada himself. So Narada, as we have seen, is this great sage, greatly devoted to God. And there are many, many stories in Indian mythology on Narada. And so once Narada became a little bit vain and egoistic because, he's doing such a lot of good work. He's constantly going around all over this universe, reminding people about the glories of God. And since he's always thinking of God, he thought, I'm probably the greatest devotee around. Not a very good way for a devotee to think. And so once he goes to God and says to Vishnu, that's how Narada's, he saw God in that form. He goes to Vishnu and says, actually he doesn't say anything, but Vishnu was able to read his mind and say, he thinks he is the greatest devotee. And so Vishnu then mentions, there is the greatest devotee of mine is on earth. And he mentions one village, that the greatest devotee of mine lives there. He's a farmer in that village. And Narada is like, well, I've gone all over the world. And I should have known if there is any greater devotee there. And so Narada says, I would like to go and see him. Vishnu says, please do. So So Narada goes and tries to let me observe how the farmer lives and see what makes him such a great devotee. And he sees externally the farmer is just like any other average Joe. Is there anything external to kind of mark him out as the great devotee of God? He just sees the farmer's had a good sleep. He wakes up in the morning with great devotion, bows down to God, remembers God, and then goes to work. He works very hard on his farm. In the afternoon, it's lunchtime. His wife brings him a lunch box. And then before eating his food, he once again mentally bows down to God, says Brahmarpanam maybe, and then has his food, and then once again starts working. And then in the evening, after he's been done a whole day's work, goes tired, has a shower, and then before having his dinner, once again remembers God, and then goes to sleep. Wakes up morning, and then Narada counts and says just 3 times. He remembered the Lord just 3 times. And I've been like doing it non-stop. So he goes to Vishnu and says, I don't understand. How come that farmer is the greatest devotee and I, who have been chanting your name all the time, I'm not? And Narada and Vishnu says, look, I will answer your question. Could you please do one thing? I want to drink milk. And can you bring milk from that other room? And Narada goes there and finds a glass filled with milk, filled to the brim with milk. And then Vishnu calls out and says, make sure that you don't spill a single drop. Bring it very carefully. Now, that glass is filled to the brim. It's not that easy. And so Narada is very careful because he doesn't want to spill it. Very carefully, slowly, he brings and offers it to Vishnu. And does it perfectly well. Not a drop spilled. So it's done it perfectly well. And Vishnu is very pleased. So he says, well done. But before he starts drinking that milk, Vishnu says, by the way, in the time that you took to bring that milk to me, how much did you remember me? How often did you remember me? Narada like, what? Like, I had to pay all my attention to make sure that this single drop doesn't fall. And what is there to remember you? You yourself gave me the work. I was doing your work. So, no, there was no need to remember you because all my attention was on that milk. And then Vishnu says, look, the work that I have given to that farmer is also my work. And he is doing my work and still manages to remember me 3 times. And I gave you this little work which needed not more than 5 minutes. And you could not remember the work during that work even once. Now, this story obviously is meant to teach us something. And that is, it's not just our spiritual activities like meditation and others, because oftentimes when people feel, oh, I have to do something in spiritual life, first thing nowadays, because meditation is such a buzzword, like if I'm doing meditation, I'm doing something spiritual. Which is not wrong, but to limit spiritual life only to a practice of meditation would be wrong. So every work that we do can be done as a spiritual seeker. And therefore, the more immersed we become in our spiritual life, we will begin to see that even those activities which we formerly saw as secular haven't really remained secular anymore. In your mind, as far as other people are concerned, they don't need to know with what frame of mind you're doing your work. For other people, it might still be a very secular work. But in your mind, if you remember that story of the farmer, no matter where you are, Whether you're in school, you're in a hospital, you are in a lawyer's firm, or you're in a Wall Street, or wherever you are, or you're cooking, or you're cleaning, or you're gardening, wherever I am, if I remember that I am doing God's work. After all, think about it. A devotee says, whatever talents I have, whatever knowledge I have acquired, whatever energy I have, it has all come through God's grace. In whichever situation I have been put in life, and all of us are in a very unique situation. No two people in this world are exactly identical. And therefore, every one of us is very special because there is nobody else, not a single person in the world with exactly the same situation as mine. So we are really unique in every way. And God knows. God knows where I am, who I am, what I have. And knowing me fully, no one knows us better than God knows us. And knowing each one of us fully, inside out, God has decided this is where you need to be. And this is what you need to be doing. That's how a devotee thinks. That it might seem as if I have made choices in life. I have chosen to do this, or I have refused to do that. But a devotee's outlook would be, if I thought I made any choices, that was my ignorance. Nothing would be possible unless God willed it. And therefore, the work I'm doing is God's work. Now, there is a problem here. What if I'm engaged in criminal activity? What I'm doing something which is wrong, which is illegal, which is immoral? Wouldn't it seem kind of an escapist way, like, well, even a thief might say, well, God has put me here, God has given me the skill to steal, and therefore I'm doing God's work. A thief might say that, but a thief won't be able to feel it deep inside. There will be always that guilty conscience. So it's not about what you say, it's not about words, it's what you know in the deepest part of our being. So if I'm doing something illegal or immoral, I may be able to fool others, and worse, I may even want to fool myself into thinking I'm doing God's work. But it will never be that. And therefore, so when I say all work can be done as God's work, it is automatically understood that the work is necessarily moral, that the work doesn't violate the basic principles of truthfulness, honesty, unselfishness, or a work that is in complete harmony with dharma. So when he says all activities, it means all activities which are good and which are right. All of these activities can be done as an offering to God because they are God's work, they are not mine. In all these Vedic worship, Vedic sacrifices, when they make all these oblations into fire, so they have these, the different Sanskrit mantras, say, Indraya Swaha, Idam na Mama, means I offer this to Indra, none of this is mine. So after every offering, the worshipper says, this doesn't belong to me, this doesn't belong to me. It's a constant reminder, nothing is mine. So that's how a devotee sees it. Everything that I see as mine is really God's, including my own life, including my own time. There is no such thing as my own. Now, we may not feel that right now, but this is something that we need to remind ourselves as often as we can if we want to deepen that bhakti, that devotion in our heart. So one, Narada says, therefore, devotion means surrendering all our activities to God. And second, extreme anguish if he is forgotten. Now, this is not to say that in that highest state we will forget God. If we reach the highest state, we will never forget. But while we are on the path, if we forget God, then we will feel very bad about it. And I mentioned briefly earlier in the last time we met, was that if we miss our meditation or a time of prayer on some day, even for a very reasonable reason, not out of laziness or anything. Of course, if you do it out of laziness, it's kind of natural to feel bad or guilty about it. But let's say, even if we are able to miss our prayer or meditation for something over which you had no control. But even that missing that chance to be in God's presence, because that's what we do when we pray or meditate, we feel that extreme anguish. We feel like, no, something is not right today. I missed something. And I said that feeling that anguish, feeling that something, not feeling good about it, is good. But if you don't feel bad about it, that's bad. So at least we can begin by feeling that sense of attachment. I consciously use the word attachment to your spiritual practice, so that on some days, if I'm not able to do it, I will feel great anguish. Now, in that highest state of bhakti, we read in the Bhagavata, for in that great text which describes the love for God that it is possible to have through many different stories. There is one place where these gopis, these milkmaids of Vrindavan who loved Krishna, who are often cited as the embodiments of that highest love, as the following sutras will point out, they did not even want, we can't constantly be staring. Oftentimes, at some point, we are going to blink. That's just the way we are. It's necessary for the health of the eyes as well. And so we read there, these gopis are saying, I don't even want to blink, because even if I blink for a moment, I'm not able to see that beautiful form of Krishna. So they are playing with Krishna, and Krishna is there playing that beautiful, that melodious flute, and they are enthralled. And they don't even want to blink, because they said, well, if I blink for that moment, I will not be able to see him. So that's what is meant by, they are not really forgetting him, but actually they are not able to see for that moment. Now that's just the poetic way it's described. So Narada says that the primary characteristic of devotion is the ability to consecrate all of our activities to God. Because surrender involves effacement of ego. As long as our ego is strong, we will not be able to surrender. We will always kind of hold back. And practicing surrender to God is a way of removing this ego. And this ego is not the real I. Ramakrishna called it the unripe I. That is what is actually preventing us from moving ahead in spiritual life. So the more we are able to get this false I out of the way, the real I, the divine I, the ripe I will then take its place. Sutra 20. That's on page 77. Asti evam evam. There are examples of such forms of devotion. Now, the sutra that we just saw earlier might seem to be a tall order. Is it really possible to consecrate all of our activities to God? Is it possible to surrender everything to God? Is it possible to feel extreme anguish if we forget God even for a short while? Is it even possible, or is it just a theory? And so this sutra points out, no, this is not simply a good idea. This is not simply a theory. It is possible because there are examples. There are examples of it not simply in mythology, but in history, and not something that may or may not have happened in ancient times, but it's possible for it even in contemporary times. So that's the message that comes from Sutra 20, Sutra 21. Yatha vraja gopikanam, as found in the lives of the gopis of Vraja. So as I mentioned earlier, the gopis, the milkmaids who loved Krishna, who worshipped Krishna, are given as the greatest examples of who embodied in their lives the definition of bhakti that Krishna gives. That everything that they did, many of these gopis were married women, so they had their duty to their family, they had children to take care of, they had household chores to attend to, and they were able to surrender all of those work. They were able to carry out all of their activities. They didn't shirk their duties. They did everything, but they did it as an offering to Krishna. And such was the intensity of their love that even if they forgot him, or if Krishna kind of got out of their sight, either directly or out of the sight of their mind, that is, they forgot Krishna even for a short while, they experienced extreme pain through many stories from their lives. The amazing descriptions we find, these 2 points are continually stressed. Verse 22. Tatrapi na mahatmya jnana vismriti apavadaha. Even there was no blame of forgetfulness of the greatness of the object of love. Now this is important. These milkmaids in that village of Vraja, most of them were illiterate. They hadn't studied scriptures. They had not attended any lectures or classes. And so the doubt that gets raised, in fact, it gets raised even in that book Bhagavata. The Bhagavata is a story which is being narrated by Vyasa, who is considered not only an enlightened being, but the purest soul ever born. And he is narrating the story to Parikshit, a king named Parikshit. And this king then asks, he says, why is it, he asks Shukadeva, who's narrating the story, Vyasa's son. He says, how could these gopis who were illiterate, they didn't know anything about how great Krishna was. Their love for Krishna was just because, well, he's charming, he's very charismatic figure. So in what way is the love of gopis for Krishna different from human love? We do. All of us experience love in life, but that's a very human expression of love. And these gopis, their love for Krishna is not in doubt, but their love for Krishna was just a human love. They just saw him as another human being. They had no idea that he is the divine being. How could they be the exemplars of this highest devotion? And the answer is given by Narada here, that no, even the gopis, they were fully aware of the greatness of Krishna. They always knew who Krishna was. Now, if you read that text, Bhagavata, you will find that this was not necessarily the case right from the beginning. Many of them were just attracted to him because he was such a lovable, such a charismatic figure. And there is always this, the divine charisma is very different from a human charisma. So there is this divinity kind of pouring out through every pore of his being. So it's not surprising that they were attracted. Krishna says in that text, he says that such is the power of God's presence, the divine presence, that no matter with what attitude some of these may have approached him, just that power of holy company changed their frame of attitude. And then they were able to see him not just as a human being, but a divine being. So they always knew how great he was. Now that greatness, the awareness of greatness, can sometimes become an obstacle. There's a story that that is told about Walt Disney's daughter. So she was very little, of course, so when she was very little, she would go to school, and her dad was her dad. I mean, she had no idea how well known and what a big personality he was. It was just like, my dad. And so every day after work, she would come home and he would be waiting for her, and then she would keep aside her books and just go and play and sing and dance, and just like children would do with their parents. Then once he found that she came from school and did not even enter his room. And he's like, what happened to you? Come. And she just standing near the door, peeping and looking at him. And then he said, what happened? Come, what's wrong? Is anything wrong? And then she comes with great hesitation. She comes and then from her pocket takes out an autograph book and asks for his autograph. And he said he almost wept, because he said, I almost thought like I lost my daughter. Because at that moment, apparently that day in school, she might have heard from someone else, oh, your dad is a big shot, your dad is this big famous person, a celebrity. And then suddenly she realized, oh, he's not simply my dad, he's a big person. And then she was so, that openness, that freedom that she experienced in his presence, suddenly was like, no, it's like a big celebrity. Could you please give me an autograph? And then he said he was shocked. And of course, gradually this went away, but that first day was very shocking for that father. He said, well, just the awareness of my greatness has created a wall. So that can happen. And we don't know exactly the details of how this thing played out in the life of every gopi. But eventually, the power of love is such that while you never forget the greatness of the object of your love, love then overpowers everything. And that's what the message that Narada is giving here. That the gopis loved Krishna with all their heart, but they never forgot who he was. But his greatness, that he was the infinite being, that he was God, that he was an incarnation, that he was an avatar, was not so important to him, important to them. That was not like, oh, we come to you because you're an avatar and because you can do these things for us. So that was not. So love, an unconditional love, means not really even thinking about what I'm going to get out of it. Oh, I love you because this. There is no because for love. If you love someone, you love someone. But if your mind starts thinking about it like, why do I love this person? And then you have these 1, 3, or 4 reasons for it, then there is that love is still not complete, not full. And that is the idea that is expressed in the next 2 sutras. Sutra 23, Tad vihinam jaranam iva. That without this knowledge of the greatness of God, the love will be like that towards paramours. In other words, if the gopis did not have that awareness of who Krishna was, then their love would be indistinguishable from just love between two human beings. But that was not such. What makes human love a divine love is that first condition that Narada points out here is respect. That where there is no mutual respect, that love hasn't become strong yet. That love hasn't flowered fully yet. And so that respect comes through the awareness of who the other person is, the greatness. In Krishna's case, the awareness that Krishna was that divine being. Sutra 24. Nasti eva tasmin tat sukha sukhitvam. This is because in that baser form of love, there is no idea of being happy in the happiness of the beloved. Tat sukha sukhitvam, being happy in the happiness of the object of our love. So sometimes they say that there are three kinds of love, at least three kinds of love. In the first kind, the person is saying, I want to be happy. I love you because it makes me happy. And if both people involved in a relationship have that attitude, I love you because it makes me happy, then me is more prominent in that relationship. So when you stop making me happy, I no longer love you. So it's a very conditional love in which one's own happiness is most important. Now there is a second kind of love, is that let's both be happy. I want to be happy, and I'll try to make you happy as well. That's the kind of a middle kind of love. And many relationships, human relationships, are based on that. Yes, let's be both happy together. My happiness is important to me, but I would like you to be happy as well. The third and the highest kind of love is, I want you to be happy. In the first kind of love, my ego is the most important. It's like my happiness is all that matters. In the second kind of love, my happiness is important, it's not gone, but I know I would like you to be happy as well, and I will continue to make you happy as long as you continue to make me happy. It's a very transactional. It's like when you go to a shop. You want to buy something, you give something to the shopkeeper gives you something. It's a transaction. So sometimes relationships can become transactional. I give you this because you give me that. The highest love, bhakti. Bhakti is sometimes devotion can become very transactional. Sometimes you say, oh, why do you worship God? Why do you meditate on God? Why do you pray to God? Oh, if I pray to God, God can give me this, God can give me that. Oh, if God is happy with me, I will go to heaven. So I really don't love God, I love heaven, but then God becomes just a way for me to get a passport to heaven or a visa to heaven. And so, or if I need something, sometimes we know that not only we might have read about these instances, perhaps we might know from among our acquaintances some people who become disillusioned with God, who said, oh, I prayed to God so much and my prayers were never answered. What's the point? I'm not going to church anymore. I'm not going to pray anymore because God doesn't care. Or if something terrible happens, he said, well, how could God allow this to happen? I'm not going to do it. In other words, I'm going to pray to God as long as God does the things that I like. If God does something which I don't like, no more prayer. Again, it's transactional. We may not see it that way. It's as if, God, I'm giving you all this devotion, provided you give me these things. If you don't, no more. So there is, in some sense, this is better than not being religious at all. But because at least this person is trying to find a spiritual solution to a worldly problem. May not be the highest, but it's better to find a spiritual solution to a worldly problem than a worldly solution to a worldly problem. So, relatively better. But the highest would be when I love God so much that I don't even think about myself. If I don't think about myself, how can I even ask anything for myself? So the highest prayer is not about asking at all. Because if I ask, then my I is still there. And so in that highest prayer is not about asking. It's just being in God's presence. And sometimes it can take a form of giving. And as I sometimes mentioned to you, there is this story in the case of a saint from South India who was so immersed in the thought of God, and he was trying to pray, but his prayer took a very different form. So instead of asking, he just beheld the Lord, and his heart got filled so much with love. And just as we would want the one who we love to be always happy, to be free from any danger, so he saw God and said, God, may you have no hurdles. May you have no problems in life. May you live long. This prayer doesn't make sense. If you think about it logically, makes no sense. You're just going to appear like, has this person gone crazy? And probably yes, crazy out of love for God. So that's the point here that Narada is trying to draw our attention to. In that highest love, there are two primary qualities: respect and selflessness. In that highest love, this little I will get out of the way. I would just want the object of my love to be happy. In fact, even if I were to suffer, even if I were to experience pain, I would gladly do it if it is going to make the object of my love happy. And therefore, in that highest state of devotion, a devotee is not really seeking, oh, give me peace of mind, give me joy, give me this, because that me is completely gone. There is no give me at all. I just want to be in the presence of God. And if I can serve God in some way, I'll do it. Not that God needs my service, not that God needs my help, but it's a privilege I have in trying to do something to help. So all the good things that we do in life to help the world in whatever way we can, we are not really doing any favor to God. It's like, well, it's God's job to help the people in need. Why I should do it? And really, the people who are in need, their needs will be fulfilled, whether or not I go and do something about it. The world is not waiting for me to do anything. In fact, but in order to help someone is a privilege. It's not something that we need to be proud of. That's the attitude of a devotee. So these are some points that we need to focus on when we study these sutras. So I'll stop here. If you have any thoughts, ideas, comments, questions?
Is surrender our natural state of being? So when we think of children, it seems that they naturally surrender to the care of their parents. So do we need to...
For a few years, until they become old. Yeah.
Correct. So do we need to actively surrender, or is surrender something that just should happen, but we've forgotten how to surrender?
No, it won't happen by default. We'll have to actively do it. Yeah. Now, by default, you have seen already what has happened. We've already gotten separated from God. And if we just allow things to just go the way they are going, we'll be lucky if it remains in the same way. Probably it might get worse. Yeah.
So Swamiji, you were mentioning that, or at least Narada was mentioning that it was implying that we should be aware of God's greatness. Otherwise, that love is not really. Otherwise, the love becomes like a human love, which is which is probably not not the highest thing. So, and I've read that even when we, let's say, that we meditate on the form of God, we should not be necessarily be focused on the form itself, but what is behind that form, right? So I'm just wanted to confirm these are both.
Yeah, that's true. It's like this.
Two different ways of looking at it, but both are consistent, I guess.
Right. I mean, even when we meditate on our Ishta, and if the Ishta has a form and a name, it's good to have at the back of the mind the awareness that although the Ishta may have a human form, the Ishta is not just a human being like you and me. In fact, there is this infinite ocean of consciousness. For instance, now, in the Vesper hymn that Vivekananda wrote, and which we sing every evening, one of the epithet applied to Sri Ramakrishna in that is called Chit Ghana Kai. Chit is consciousness, Kaya is the body, and Ghana means concentrated. So Vivekananda said that Ramakrishna's form is a concentrated form of consciousness. So if consciousness were to be packed in a small, and if consciousness were to take a form, this is the form it would take. Now that's what a devotee of Ramakrishna would see, that even when Ramakrishna's form is being meditated upon, to recognize that it's special in the sense that it is just consciousness which is taken that form. Because ultimately behind the form stands the formless reality. And the formless reality is just pure consciousness. And that's too abstract and ideal. When our attachment to our own form becomes less, it will be easier for us then to think of our spiritual ideal as beyond form. As long as my own form and the forms of other things in the world are very real to me, it is easier and natural for me then to even try to think of God in some form or some name. And when the forms loosen their hold on my mind, the form of the divine which I meditate on will also begin then to kind of gradually merge into that infinite. So that is the dynamic relationship between the devotee and God. As the devotee evolves, the divine that the devotee meditates on also seems to evolve. So when the devotee becomes formless, then the God whom the devotee worships will also become formless. Yeah.
Swamiji, one quick follow-up question. So if in the beginning stages, if you get enamored by the form of your Ishta, which is very natural, then because your concentration is in the form, then you will forget what the Ishta stands for.
No, you won't.
No?
No, you won't.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's like this. It's like this, it's... I mean, just think about the examples we have from daily life. That we might be enamored of some form, but it's not like I'm so enamored of the form, I don't even know who the person is. We always know. There's some, it may be at the back of the mind that, oh, this person is this or that. So it's possible to kind of hold those two. One or the other might be more prominent, but the other never really disappears. So even when you're focused on the form, at the background you know whose form that is. And I think that's very important to remember. Because forms are not eternal. Forms eventually will go away. And so we should know who is behind that form, because one who is behind that form is eternal. The forms won't remain forever. Okay, so we will stop here today. And when we meet next time, we'll begin with Sutra number 25. Take a look when you go home, if you get time, try to read this commentary on Sutra 24 very elaborately. Swami Bhuteshananda mentions about the difference between divine love and human love. Because the mode of communication, language, that's same. And so how do we then speak of divine love as distinct from human love using the same language, the same words? And that is the tricky part. We have to approach the subject with great attention, great alertness, because oftentimes the language used in this love of the devotee towards God, you can see in some of the mystic literatures of different traditions. In Christian mysticism, oftentimes the soul is seen as the feminine, is referred to as the feminine, and God. And so it's the love between this feminine soul and the divine, the language of love. You see in St. John of the Cross or St. Teresa. And of course, this great profound descriptions in songs and in books, the love between the gopis and Krishna. The language used is a language of human love. But if we forget who are the people involved in that relationship, on one side is Krishna, who is this embodiment of purity. And then there is these gopis who are, their little eye is gone completely. They have completely surrendered to the divine. Then we understand the purity of that love. So the language, and therefore oftentimes Vivekananda used to say that it's possible to see secular activities with divine eyes, and it's possible to misread divine activities with secular eyes. There is an instance told about Ramakrishna once when he was going to Calcutta from Dakshineshwar, on a horse carriage. And apparently they passed by one liquor shop and kind of a bar of those days. And there were all these people drunk and in that state of intoxication, just kind of rambling, all kind of very worldly, vulgar talk. And Ramakrishna's carriage is going, and he looks at what's going on there, and he goes into samadhi. Now we say, well, what's there to go into samadhi at such a purely, very earthly scene? And what Ramakrishna saw there was just that drunkenness. Just as a devotee can become drunk, intoxicated by just the beauty of God's form. One can become intoxicated by just the sound of the mantra. One can become intoxicated it's kind of an inebriation. Sometimes Ramakrishna himself he couldn't keep his balance. Somebody had to hold him. And to someone who had no idea who he was, it would be easy to mistake, like, has this person been drunk so much? So externally, it does look like a state of intoxication. So when Ramakrishna saw that very earthly scene, he went into samadhi. So he was seeing an earthly activity, a secular activity with divine eyes. On the other hand, if we read some of this mystic literature with very secular eyes, we will not be able to even understand or appreciate that highest form of divine love being described. But just see there, it just will arouse our own, the human passions associated with that language. And so I would encourage you to read this commentary on Sutra 24, when it's very beautifully and very clearly the distinction between human love and divine love is described. So we begin next week on Sutra number 25. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. On Sunday, we have a guest speaker, Professor Jeffrey Long of Elizabethtown College, will speak on Within You, Without You, the Inner Life and the Outer World. Next Wednesday, we'll continue with the study of Narada Bhakti Sutra, and on Tuesday and Saturday, our Arati and meditation will also continue as usual. Let's conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.